Mushrooms and toadstools are unique. Their form and their way of life are quite unlike any other living things. They're plants. Usually they grow on soil or dead wood, but they're also parasites on living trees. They're not whole plants, they're actually the equivalent of flowers, setting free millions of fungal seeds called spores. Millions of spores are needed because only a very few will find the exact conditions they need to germinate.
They are, beyond any doubt, the most extraordinary group of plants on Earth. They don't seem to follow any of the rules. They don't go green like other plants. They don't need the sun. They spend most of their time as a little cotton wool structure underneath the surface of the ground. And then suddenly, they will produce a weird and wonderful structure like that when the rest of the plant world is getting ready for its winter sleep.
The sheer diversity and variety of shape and size and colour, from a big, tough, velvety bracket to a fragile, gelatinous antler, is one of the delightful surprises in store. A tree stump will sooner or later be transformed by tiers of delicate stearium shells back to soil. Appearances can be deceptive. Innocent-looking rubbery ping-pong balls erupt under cover of darkness into the dog stinkhorn. Colours run riot to sharpen the autumn tints. And shapes? The bird's nest fungus looks for all the world like an acorn husk, but in the bottom it has minute, pale eggs containing the spores.
The old tale of big fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite them actually extends to toadstools as well, because this is one of the very unusual examples of one toadstool actually growing as a parasite on another. This rather sort of smelly black stuff here is an old russula, and growing on top of it is this lovely little thing called Asterophora parasitica.
Sometimes a single fly agaric fruiting body will emerge from the underground tangle of the mycelial threads, and then another mycelium may generate a whole community of 100 or more in a tight clump, like the sulfur tuft. Some fungi glow in the dark. Candle snuff, which grows on stumps and sawn timber, was one of several luminous species which people thought might undermine the effectiveness of the wartime blackout. One way to get familiar with the thousands of species is to join the British Mycological Society's mushroom hunts. These forays have been a central feature of mycological life since the 1870s, when the famous Wollop Club drew fungus lovers from far and wide to their autumn forays in Hereford. These were by no means sombre affairs. People arrived by whatever means of transport they could afford, spurred on by the anticipation of a day spent in pursuit of rare fungi. It was all followed by an evening of conversation, wine, and a menu fit to revive the most jaded mycological palate. Conservation groups and natural history societies are still running these field forays.
Really, the best way to start is to go on one of these things, and then after you've been on one, you'll probably get hooked if you're anything like me, or, you'll be at it for, you go next weekend, you'll be off on one. They're normally Saturday and Sunday. So you can perhaps drive 30 miles and you'll find one on Saturday, and you might have to drive 60 miles and you'll find one on Sunday. And there there'll be an expert. And you just go out in the field and you collect the mushrooms and you produce them. The expert will tell you what they are.
Let's see if there's anything over here.
They aren't academic. They make a real point of them not being academic. The people may sound a little bit academic and throw Latin words at you a bit much, and that might be a little bit intimidating, but you'll find the other people doing it will be just like you. They won't know anything. They'll be picking up this thing, which is the most common mushroom in the world, and saying, "Oh, can you tell me what this is?"
And then have a look and see what we've got. It looks rather like a Boletus, doesn't it? Lovely. Oh, what a super one. Mm. Oh, it's lovely. It's a lovely... now, that's rather an unusual one because, you see, it's got these bright red pores, which not very many have. And then on the stem, it's got these little tiny red dots, which is characteristic of this particular Boletus, and it's Boletus erythropus. And the other thing about this one is that it goes a blue colour. Hmm?
Could you spell it?
Erythropus. And then it's got the brown cap, and when you mark it like this, it goes a very, very deep indigo blue, which some of the Boleti do that and some do not, and that's quite important when you're trying to identify them. But that's very nice.
In the British Isles, we have about 3,500 species of fungi which are big enough to see with the naked eye and to handle. Their occurrence is spread over pastures and woodlands, coniferous, deciduous, and mixed. They're split into two main divisions based not on appearance but on the style of spore production. The biggest division is the basidiomycetes. They produce microscopic basidiospores on the tips of special hyphae which line gills or tubes opening by little pores or sometimes gill-like ridges. There are four major groups of basidiomycetes. Brackets, or Aphelophorales, which also include the fairy clubs, the chanterelles and the tooth fungi. Agaricales, which are the familiar mushrooms and toadstools. Gasteromycetales, which are the puffballs, the stinkhorns and the like. And a small group of jelly fungi called the tremolales.
The brackets start off in their simplest forms as a little crust which lies flat on a piece of wood and the spore-bearing layer is on top. And then to make themselves more efficient, they sort of lift up into a little flap or a bracket. Now there is one called Styrium hirsutum because it's hairy, which is actually taking over the seat that I'm sitting on.
Some of the simpler brackets can cover large surface areas, and they develop in the most delicate papery festoons. Other brackets are tough and corky, and almost all of them do considerable economic damage. Heterobasidium is a major pest of conifers. It diseases the timber and it causes the deaths of many trees if it gets hold in a plantation.
And because most of these brackets grow on wood, they're very selective. Each one gets its own particular needs from a particular tree, which actually makes them very easy to identify. This one up here only grows on birch, and in fact it's in the process of killing this birch tree. It attacks the sapwood. It's called Piptoporus betulinus. It's the birch bracket. And back in the old days, people were extremely ingenious as to how they used things. Now, if I cut this in half, like that. First of all, they used this inside flesh for making corn pads, believe it or not. They also made tap washers out of it because it's got a kind of spongy, almost felty feel to it. And they also called it the razor strop fungus. Amazing what you carry around in the woods. On an old-fashioned solid razor, they used to pin a strip of this to a piece of wood and then strop the razor with it.
But even fungi the size of birch brackets pale into insignificance beside the giants of the group.
And this is the biggest of them. Beautiful thing called Ganoderma. It means shining skin. It actually attacks old beech trees and finishes them off. Now these brackets are 2 feet across. Very hard, very tough. They last all the year round.
Not all of the Aphilophorales take the form of brackets. This beautiful fungus is Romaria, growing on a buried pine stump. The fertile surface is at the tips of the branches, looking for all the world like some fragile elfin growth of stalagmites or a coral. The chanterelles also fall into the same broad division. These are close relatives of the common chanterelle, called Pseudocraterellus, pale, crenellated horns rising from the floor of a beech wood. But remember, this is the form you're most often going to come across in the Aphilophorales, a bracket. Whether they're tiny or large like Ischnoderma on an oak trunk, it often oozes a giveaway resiny substance from its pores.
The biggest group, though, is the one which we would call mushrooms and toadstools. And I suppose this is the cliche for all of them. This is what everybody thinks of as a toadstool. It's actually called a fly agaric, Amanita muscaria. This is the one in the Enid Blyton books, and we will incidentally be looking at this later on in the series as a poisonous toadstool. But just let's look at it as a typical example at the moment. What any mushroom is, basically, is something which produces spores, and this is very well designed for it. It's got a roof to keep out the rain and the wind.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Catchphrase. We've got everything. We've got big...
They have what's called a veil over them, which in fact protects them from the soil and the roots as they're coming up. This one has 2 veils. One of them is left as little patches all over the cap and finishes up attached to the stalk there as a little skirt, and the other one, which is much bigger, comes right round and attaches as what's called the vulva right round the base there. And as the cap expands upwards, so the veil is just left as these little white patches.
Descriptions aren't infallible. A downpour can wash off patches, but at one time or another, fly agaric will usually show textbook features.
So cap colour and texture are important for identifying, and in this case the olive green cap with the little brown blotches give this away as a thing called Lactarius blenius, which is very common. But there is another clue for the whole Lactarius group, and it's this. They all produce milk.
Search for the understatements. Horsehair fungus stands in perky splendour an inch high, but it can carpet a forest floor by the thousands. The Boletus group stand by themselves, though they are a close cousin to the agarics, and all have gills replaced by pores. The third group of basidiomycetes is called the Gasteromycetales, and it has all the puffballs and the earth balls. They produce their spores inside the fruiting body, and when the spores are ripe, the outer wall either rots down or it opens by a little hole. Most of them grow on soil, a few of them are on rotten wood, and this Scleroderma earthball is one of the very common ones. The group also has some real surprises up its sleeve, which may seem illogical to our eyes, but they're designed to spread the spores by a means which is sometimes used by green plants.
Now this has to be one of the most bizarre forms of all fungi. It's a stinkhorn, Phallus impudicus. It starts looking like a puffball, which is in fact what it's related to. But instead of breaking open and the spores being borne away on the wind, something quite extraordinary happens to this. Incidentally, if I can lift this out, you see it's attached by a little stalk. Now this is beginning to split open and there's a sort of jelly appearing there. Now overnight, quite literally, that erupts and out of it comes an extraordinary looking fruiting body, and it makes it very obvious how it gets its name phallus. And the green top is in fact a sort of gooey stuff which is attractive to flies, and it contains the spores. The flies eat it all off, and then at the end of the day it finishes up looking like that, and you've got this sort of pitted cap where all the green was, and that stinks something horrible.
And to the Victorian eye, it looked something horrible. Charles Darwin had an eccentric daughter called Etty. She used to roam the forest collecting up stinkhorns, and she burned them behind locked doors so as not to corrupt the servants. Gerard's Herbal, printed in 1638, had much the same thought. It actually pictured the offending specimen upside down. A far cry from the Gratin des Champignons, a recent French bestseller. It's full of the most charming mushroom cartoons. In this one, the Phallus impudicus is depicted as a rather engaging rogue.
There is a rumour, and it's just a rumour, that somewhere in this lot there is something that I must admit I'd give my eye teeth to find, because I've never seen it before. This is an old ash tip. It's quite near a main road. Being told that something is around and actually finding it, mind you, is two different things. These are very small, but they are quite dramatic. I give up. No, I don't. No, I don't. How about that? Now that, gosh, I'm really excited about seeing that. I've never seen one of these before in my life. I've seen pictures of them. That is an earth star, a thing called Giaster. And it's like a puffball, except that it's got an outer layer which sort of folds back into a little star. And if I puff that, it should produce spores out of the top. There they go.
Because many in this group produce their spores in a closed bag, they rely on the rain. When a drop hits the paper-thin wall, the impact, the tiny, tiny impact, makes the spore mass puff out through the vent which opens when the fruiting body is ripe. Last but not least in the Basidiomycetes come the tremolales. One of the most common is Jewsia. All the jelly fungi can dry to a hard lump, but in damp weather they revive completely. So much for the Basidiomycetes. The other large division, the Ascomycetes, with their microscopic spores in flasks, are not quite so easy to separate. Roughly, they split up into the cup fungi, or Pezizas, the Helvellas and Morcellas, whose cups have turned inside out and risen up on stalks, the truffles, which grow underground, and an assortment of odds and ends, but all with individual features that are easy to distinguish. Ascomycetes are mainly woodland forms, though some of them grow on bare soil, and many of them appear in the spring. In the autumn, orange peel fungus is one of the commonest of the cup fungi, though it's not so much a cup as a wrinkly saucer. Cup fungi often appear on burnt ground. This is Peziza petersi, and one of the best places to look for it is on a bonfire site. The helvellas are extraordinary forms. The cups have turned inside out and they've pushed up on elastic, spongy stalks. Helvellas are poisonous, though they do have some close relatives which are definitely for the kitchen. These morels have their fertile surfaces covering a honeycomb of pits. Truffles, both the black and the white forms, all produce underground fruiting bodies. And like the stinkhorns, they need animals for dispersal. The truffle has an aroma irresistible to dogs, pigs and the like, and the spores pass unharmed through the animal's digestive system. The odds and ends, you just have to learn from experience. But like coral spot fungus on dead twigs, once you know them, they're usually unmistakable. The black sickles of ergot fungus, claviceps, which invade the ovaries in the ears of grasses, take a bit of finding, but once you've seen them, they're never forgotten. Nor are the weird shapes of the black earth tongues as they poke through mown grass like carved alien statues. You don't have to hike miles off the beaten track. Fungi tend to be more prolific along the edges of roads and trackways because they're spread by car tires and people's feet.
The first thing people think is that mushrooms grow in fields and in grassland. And basically, I suppose about 10–15% of mushrooms grow in grassland, and the other 85% grow in woodland. So the first thing is, once you get into it, you're going to be collecting in woodland most of the time. And you build up a feeling. You go and you find chanterelles in this wood, let's say. And then when you come into another wood, you cast your eyes around and you see the sort of spot they were in before. And you go to that spot, and then you have a better probability of finding chanterelles. And, you know, that's how it goes along, really. You get the feel for the habitats. After you've found them a couple of times, you get a feel for them.
But in spite of the interest in mushrooms and toadstools, distribution of species in the British Isles is still not entirely clear. The British Mycological Society wants to make a survey of some of the fungi which appear through the woods and fields of Britain, and they're asking for help.
Where we want to get the amateurs involved is to produce an atlas of some of the commoner fungal species. So what the Society is doing is drawing up a list of about 50 fairly common, easily recognisable toadstools. And we're going to encourage people to go out to every kilometre square in the British Isles over the next 3 or 4 years and record whether these toadstools are present or absent. And then we're going to produce a series of maps showing the distribution of some of the commoner fungal species. Now, for people who are interested in mosses and lichens, this may seem odd because they've already produced their maps, but fungi have not been recorded as systematically as many of these other groups of plants.
And then if you break the base of this...
Mycologists like Audrey Thomas are going to play an important
walking along and looking directly for it. It's terrifically exciting.